the first question I wanted to ask was, do you think Russia's invasion of Ukraine was illegal under international law?
I don't know. I don't know whether it was legal, but there was no international law from the U.S. side. So I don't know whether what Russia did was legal, but I know what the United States was doing was completely illegal, repeatedly, nonstop. And I think that's really important. And to me, just to, by the way, make the point, the coup in 2014 is not even close. It's a US-backed, spurred, provoked, and perhaps fully managed coup. I don't know every detail of what happened, but I know a lot. And two things I know. One, everybody knows. We know Victoria Nuland's role, because not only did she tell us, but it was also intercepted nicely by the Russians, so we could listen to it. And I very much appreciate that tape, because it's just one of the most vulgar conversations in modern American history. And second was that immediately after the coup, I was called by the new Ukrainian government. I didn't know really what was going on, didn't understand it very well, but Yatsenyuk, who was the prime minister that came in, said, "I'd like to speak to you because you're the guy that knows how to handle financial emergencies." So I went to Kiev, and I was shown around by an NGO who explained to me how much they had paid for the Maidan. So I ended up leaving that afternoon, sick to my stomach, and really grossed out, I have to say, by the whole thing. But I was proudly told, what a great operation we just had. Okay, this is really disgusting. It's illegal. It is a cause of war. It created a war. It is the deep state, and it's what the U.S. does for a living. So it's a very vivid case, and to my mind, it showed how utterly disgusting the U.S. approach was. I would not have known it exactly, but for being there that one day, because it was pretty awful.
And how invested do you think the United States is in a hot war in Ukraine? Because it seems to me that escalating and escalating and escalating, whether they are playing chicken or whether they genuinely want an all-out NATO-Russia war, there does seem to be a kind of policy that would risk it. What do you think is the US priority, and what do you think the US goals are? Do you think they're committed enough that they would permit a hot war between NATO and Russia?
I think there are a few things to say, which is first, the U.S. the U.S. military-industrial complex is a big, complicated organization of $1 trillion a year business plus. So it doesn't change quickly. And what we're observing is a strategy that was put in place 30 years ago. And there has not been a formal change to that strategy till now. Now, when it was put in place, they really believed in the unipolar world. China was nowhere on the horizon. Russia seemed completely helpless in all of this. And so a strategy was put in place that is literally still in place. So that doctrine hasn't changed. And the idea of the doctrine and the decisions taken were that the US should have full spectrum dominance in all parts of the world. Now, it's a delusion. It was hubris then, reckless, but now it's completely delusional because obviously we don't have full spectrum dominance. Well, they haven't gotten around to writing a different strategy yet. There's no document that says, now we are in a multipolar world, what should we do? we're still on the old strategy. Believe me, a lot of people believe in it. Some people, no doubt, don't believe in it. I'm prepared to believe there's a debate inside, which they don't cut me in on, but I'm prepared to believe that there are different points of view. And some people say, shit, we shouldn't get into a nuclear war. And other people say, come on, stay on strategy, and so on. Then, of course, up until now, I think the feeling was things are more or less working out okay. Why? Because, yeah, maybe we spend $100 billion a year, but okay, we're a $28 trillion economy. That's not a big deal. This is to defeat Russia, so come on, keep a perspective. Second, they absolutely could care less about how many Ukrainians die. It's not even an issue. It's not a plus, but it's not a negative. The only problem is they're running out of Ukrainians. They actually can't literally grab people off the streets, put them in training, and put them on the front line to stop the Russians right now. So that's real. Not because they changed the strategy or they were wringing their hands saying, God, this didn't work out the way we wanted. There's 600,000 Ukrainians dead. I don't think they give a fuck, if you'll excuse me, because I've never heard one word of regret about that. And so they're playing a hand with a lot of bluff. They're playing a hand where it's not their lives on the line. It's not their money on the line. But what is happening isn't working. So that's interesting. And it's not only not working, it's adverse. Ukraine is it's losing on the battlefield. All these NATO weapons didn't turn the tide. Being cut out of the SWIFT banking system didn't turn the tide. Comprehensive US sanctions didn't turn the tide. UN sanctions against North Korea are over. Russia's allied with Iran. China is a peer competitor in every real way, if not way ahead in manufacturing in many areas. And so it's not working. And so they're not counting the money, which isn't a big deal. They're not counting the lives at all, which is my disappointment because, I would have thought 600,000 lives would mean something, that someone might notice that and say something about that, because I truly believe this is a cataclysmic tragedy. They don't want to have a nuclear war. They really don't. I'm sure of that, by the way, because everybody would end up dead. So I don't think that that's a game. But they thought that, short of that, we'll keep trying. We'll try this, we'll try that, we'll do the sanctions, we'll do this, we'll have the counteroffensive. And none of the costs of that mattered to the US strategists. So my take when you ask on this is they can't be happy with the situation right now. But again, remember, it's not their money, it's not their lives, it's not a US draft. They do not want nuclear war, I'm sure. But on the other hand, they kept thinking, we got to beat these guys somehow. And they can't. And they won't. And Russia is very, it's very cautious, I would say, step by step. But it really does not want to be attacked inside in Moscow. It does not want US missiles. And they're debating this right now as we speak. I'll say the following. The British are the worst by far because there's no constraint on Britain, because Britain is a kind of cheerleader. It has nothing to add to this at all, except 180 years of Russophobia. which goes back to 1840 by my date. And so Britain is the most irresponsible because it was the greatest empire. It's got endless empire nostalgia. It's got endless Russophobia, and it would say or do anything because it just would. Then come the Baltics and Poland, which hate Russia so much they can taste it. And they want anything to defeat Russia. And then you have the Zelensky regime, which hangs by a thread because they've killed so many people. It's been a disaster. It's been lies. It's been everything. He rules by martial law, by the fingernail, as I said. And you have the Americans who are on a 30-year plan that is coming to an end because it can't work. And the delusions are springing out everywhere. And no doubt, American history shows through leaks and memoirs and gossip and then declassification how many utterly stupid people we have in positions of high responsibility that are so stupid it's hard to imagine, so reckless, so ready to have a nuclear war. And we have a president who is who's long past the sell-by date, and that's a bad thing because the main job of a U.S. president, which Biden never performed, but the main job of a U.S. president is to stop the war machine, and Biden never really did that, but now he probably can't even do that.
It's an interesting or scary mix when you've got this president you talk about who's barely there, and then these hawks that are willing to take massive risks really by striking into Russia itself. So for me, it seems like it could spiral out of control very quickly. When you were talking about Washington's disregard for Ukrainian life, and as you said, 600,000 Ukrainian lives have been sacrificed for this policy from Washington, it made me think of Israel's war in Gaza, which is also a US war, and the total disregard for Palestinian life there. It seems to me there are parallels between the two wars.
Absolutely. By the way, direct parallels. Nobody counts the dead. Nobody in Washington. It's not even an issue, but they're trained. This is what's called sophistication. They never count the dead. But by the way, that goes through Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, it goes to Syria, it goes to Afghanistan, it goes to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's truly, utterly the American way, is you do not count the dead.
In my opinion, Gaza is a major turning point in world history just because of the awakening it's ushered in amongst the global population. Because we've had 11 months of genocide be live streamed on our phones. We've seen some of the most awful things we've ever seen. And yet we've looked as well to Washington and seen President Biden, who's a Democrat, who are meant to be the good guys, defend it all, arm it all, and ventriloquize Israeli propaganda. Now, for people who don't understand how the system works, which is most people, this has been a real sea change because they can't put those two contradictory things together. How can America say that it's for human rights, democracy, fairness, when the president is defending some of the most awful things we've ever seen? And do you think that the awakening that has been around the world about the reality of US power over Gaza has changed the view of the United States and its role in the world?
Everything about Gaza is grotesque, disgusting. It is a genocide. It is war crimes every day. But it's not so different from many other things that the US has done. It's shocking because we see it, and we see TikTok feeds of celebrating rabbis and celebrating IDF personnel and so forth, gloating as they blow up a hospital or blow up a university, or we have the accounts of torture. But I'm telling you, it's not different. Napalming the Vietnamese, carpet bombing North Korea, by the way, in 1951, 52, there were no cameras there, but it was mass carpet bombing. What we did in Cambodia and Laos, I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of these places post-war. Also to walk through Cambodia, and there are large places when you go, no, we can't go there. There's still so much ordnance in the field. There's still unexploded mines and horrible things. And the U.S. still trying to collect debt from Cambodia 50 years later, after a debt taken on by a CIA-imposed government of Laos with an illegal bombing campaign of mass carpet bombing. So, and by the way, everything we know about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which took a long time to come out, but where it was finally definitively established that the official line, which was that this was to bring the war to an end sooner, was a pile of crap. This was after the Japanese begged to surrender. There was no reason to use the bomb except as a demonstration of American power and all the rest. And to use two of them, and not to have a second thought after Hiroshima, but Nagasaki went ahead on its bureaucratic schedule a few days later. No, in this sense, Gaza is not different. It makes me sick.
And from your experience in Washington, working on the inside, I just wanted to ask, how powerful do you think the secret agencies within our politics are? Because this is a system which is often called parapolitics, the parts of our political system which are secret, which operate in the shadows. And many people are scared to talk about them because they don't want to be called a conspiracy theorist. And I think that is a very powerful way of controlling the debate, because if you make people scared of talking about this stuff, then the population at large won't do it. But you have the CIA particularly in Washington, which has huge amounts of power and was only reined in briefly in 1975 during the Church Committee, but was unleashed in many ways after September the 11th and became a kind of paramilitary or private army of the president. So can you just say, how powerful do you think the CIA is, and how powerful do you think this parapolitical system is within our political body?
Well, first of all foreign policy of the United States is conducted secretly. So everything is classified. The American public is not really told anything about key decision-making risks. The biggest crime in Washington is leaking classified material, because the whole state depends on secrecy. So that's not just the CIA, it is the security state broadly. The CIA is extremely powerful within that because it operates all over the world. It's the president's private army. It operates with impunity. There is no oversight at all as far as I'm concerned. Even the quote-unquote oversight of the intelligence committees are of members of Congress that are completely suborned by the intelligence agencies to begin with. We've had 77 years of the CIA, and there has been one congressional investigation 49 years ago. It's the only time. And when it was investigated, one absolute horror after another was revealed. And for 49 years since then, there's been no church committee. It was the last time in 49 years. And it did not take till 2001 for the CIA to come back charging. It only took till Reagan. So already by the beginning of the Reagan administration and Bill Casey, the CIA was back in the saddle, as it were. And it does terrible things all over the world. And I've seen some of them, by coincidence, because I don't go it's not my department, I'm an economist, but I see governments overthrown and I see the hand of the CIA in that, and then I watch how nothing ever happens. Nothing's even looked at, no questions asked. One of the stories that I've told in the last few weeks is that I was trying to help and kibitz with Aristide in Haiti, who I liked and who told me they're going to come get me. And I took it as a metaphor, first of all, and because I'm naive about these things. No, we're going to help you. We're going to get your loan. We're going to do this and that. And sure enough, soon afterwards, the CIA came to get him. And literally, the U.S. ambassador walked Aristide, broad daylight, to an unmarked plane, told him, your life's in jeopardy, get in the plane. And the next thing he knew, I think 23 hours later, he was in Central African Republic, deposed in broad daylight. And for me, what was interesting beyond that story in and of itself was that I called the New York Times reporter for Haiti, and I said to her, cover this, report on this. And she told me, Jeff, my editor's not interested. A coup in broad daylight in the Western Hemisphere, and the New York Times basically never discussed it. Never was interested, couldn't be bothered. Maybe there was a story that he escaped for his life, but talk about it, investigate it, raise questions about it, hell no. And so that, you don't get more clarity than that, in my view. So these are things that for me are quite striking, that it's broad daylight. It's not even subtle. By the way, the Kennedy assassination was broad daylight, and I was 9 years old, so I didn't understand a lot at the time. But after a lifetime, it was a coup in broad daylight. Not even subtle, by the way. People were pointing at where the shots came from. Zapruder film showed where the shots came from. The count of the bullets, everything said this was a shambolic cover-up, broad daylight. So this is interesting. It's not what we think. It's not even subtle. And that's why you can have a call of Victoria Nuland and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Sachs, opining several weeks before Yanukovych's overthrow of who the next government is going to be. And it turns out to be that one, of course, Yatsenyuk. And it's intercepted and posted, and it raises no question for the New York Times. Nobody asks a question. I always mention the New York Times because that was the newspaper that I read all my life and kind of looked to find out something. Now I can't even stand to scan it online, even the page. It's so uninteresting and so puerile. But it's not subtle. And it raises another point, which is if you don't believe in conspiracies, you don't get anything. Of course, these are conspiracies. Conspiracies mean when a group of people do something secretly, illegally. Well, that's another name for that is U.S. foreign policy. It's not even subtle. It's regime change operations, it's coups, it's all kinds of CIA operations, it's secret wars and so on. Those are all conspiracies. You don't have to be some crazy person. In fact, if you don't believe it, you're just not paying attention.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that that's one of the main ways they stop people having a systematic analysis of these agencies, this secret parapolitics that has so much influence is people don't want to be called a conspiracy theorist, and that's what you get called. So it's a very clever way to make people shut up, effectively. What you're describing is an out-of-control empire, essentially, one that is launching covert wars all over the world, hot wars, proxy wars, using intelligence agencies to overthrow governments and really sow chaos around the world. And in that context, the major geopolitical shift we've seen in recent decades has been the rise of China. as a competitor to the United States. And in my opinion, China, although also concerned with domination like every superpower, has a different way of doing things. For example, if it goes to Africa and wants to work with the government and that government doesn't want to work with them, they won't then overthrow that government. They'll just move on to the next one and try and do a deal with the next one. It seems to be a more Pacific approach thus far. So do you agree with me that there's a different complexion to Chinese foreign policy? And do you then hold out some hope for the future in the rise of China, and that they may build a world less riven by war and less riven by chaos that we're seeing emanating from Washington and its allies?
Yeah, the way that I've recently summarized this in my own mind is that there's the term hegemon. And I always used to use the term hegemon to mean a country that would aspire to global dominance. And in the 19th century, that was clearly Britain. And in the second half of the 20th century, the United States that aspired to that. John Mearsheimer uses the term hegemon as a dominant regional power. So no doubt the US is hegemonic in the Western Hemisphere. And I believe China is hegemonic in that sense in East Asia. And I believe Russia is hegemonic in the region of the former Soviet Union. And I believe that India is hegemonic by that standard in South Asia. And I count those as the four hegemonic powers in our world today. They're quite different from, say, Germany or France or Britain. All four that I mentioned, China, US, Russia, India, are very large economies, large populations, the US being, well, Russia with 150 million approximately, and China, and US 335 million, and India and China with 1.4 billion. They're all nuclear powers, but lots of nuclear weapons and building their nuclear capacities also. So my feeling is that it's not just China's rise, it's also what we're seeing in Ukraine. The US cannot defeat Russia. It can't. It thought it could bring Russia to its knees, it thought it could provoke regime change, it thought it could crush Russia, embarrass Russia, bluff Russia, but it could not. Putin said, no, I'm not going with you, and I'm not even accepting NATO on my border. So we'll go to war if that's the point. And the US is, in literally these days, is seeing the result of that. The whole idea of expanding NATO to Ukraine was about as stupid as could be. It didn't make me safer, didn't make Ukraine safer. It only made me less safe and Russia less safe because it brought us closer to nuclear war. And so the whole idea was completely absurd and obscene because we just spent 600,000 Ukrainian lives over this absolutely stupid, useless idea. But the point I would make is that the US can't defeat India. The US can't defeat China. Just one missile getting through is enough to really fuck you over. So the US cannot have wars with these countries. It can't defeat them. It can play games in their neighborhood. It can do all sorts of things. It can try to overthrow them. It actually can't defeat them. That's a great starting point for peace, if we just recognize that. And my point about all of this is stay out of each other's neighborhood. Don't provoke, because the only risk the United States faces as a country at a fundamental level is a nuclear war. Otherwise, no one could touch us, okay? Yes, our subways don't work, our escalators don't work, my street is lined with garbage, and there are homeless people all over New York. We're screwing ourselves, but for another country, they cannot threaten me at all, except a nuclear war. So my advice is, please don't try to push NATO to Ukraine, because I don't want to die in a nuclear war. And please don't, provoke Pakistan to attack India, or let's not have a nuclear war over Taiwan, which we already said 52 years ago is part of China, and so on. Just stay a little away from each other, and we could actually get on with things just fine, because China cannot threaten the United States, India cannot threaten the United States, Russia cannot threaten the United States, except nuclear annihilation of everybody. That's the only threat. Okay, so in this sense, China's rise is, yes, it definitely adds a peer competitor, to use their language. I don't even view it as a competitor. I like China. I view it as a great civilization that is 10 times older than the United States, and I like the food. I like the sightseeing. I like the people. I like my Chinese students. I like my Chinese colleagues. And I see absolutely no reason for conflict. Yes, we can compete. They did 5G better than us. They're going to produce electric vehicles better than us. But there's no other reason for any darker talk, much less this talk about, a fight to the finish.
I wanted to ask now about Donald Trump, because he's often presented in the media as this unique and alien threat to American democracy and America's role in the world. To me, that seems wrong. To me, he's maybe a more honest representation of what America has always been. And he doesn't speak in the nice liberal terms, the Harvard grad terms about America's role in the world and parrot all the propaganda. But he is a representation of what America is and has been. Do you think Donald Trump is a unique threat to American democracy? And do you think his foreign policy is a unique threat to the world? Or is he merely a continuation of the same policies as we saw under Biden and we saw under Obama, just more honestly presented? And in fact, the priorities of the same interests are being promoted, which is the permanent government, the parts of the state which don't change regardless of who's in the White House.
If you look at foreign policy, I don't like Donald Trump's foreign policy, but I'll say the following. He didn't launch any new wars. So he was the president that made no new wars, the only one from Clinton onward. Clinton had Serbia, Bush, Afghanistan, and Iraq, Obama, Syria, Libya, and Ukraine. Trump, no new wars. Biden doubling down on Ukraine. And basically continuing most of the rest. So I give Trump some points for that. I don't give him too many points, by the way, because he really screwed up the negotiations with Iran. He really screwed up the negotiations with North Korea. He really screwed up the negotiations or any chance for peace in the Middle East because he was as all of them are completely tied to the hip with Israel. So I don't give him big points. I don't give him any points on climate and many other things. So I don't want to be misunderstood, except on foreign policy, Biden was worse than Trump, I would say. Biden really believed in this stuff. Biden was part of the NATO enlargement in 2014. He was part of the coup in 2014. He definitely played that role. And he prosecuted a war in Ukraine that cost hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian dead, completely avoidable. And he has been complicit in genocide in Gaza. I don't know if Trump would have done anything different on Gaza, probably not. On Ukraine, I think probably, yes, probably would have done different, and claims that he's going to do different, and I kind of hope that that's the case. The truth, though, is that we don't know, because presidents don't have all that much say. And that, I think, is, again, to go back to the point that we started with. And I was quoting it earlier, so I'll quote it to you because I pulled it up. Putin told Le Figaro on 29 May 2017, I'm quoting from a book of James Haslam that is coming out, but this is what Putin said, quote, I have already spoken to 3 US presidents. They come and go, but politics stay the same at all times. Do you know why? Because of the powerful bureaucracy. When a person is elected, they may have some ideas. Then people with briefcases arrive, well-dressed, wearing dark suits, just like mine, except for the red ties, since they wear black or dark blue ones. These people start explaining how things are done, and instantly everything changes. This is what happens with every administration. And it's just completely classic. Putin gets it, of course. He understands the American deep state more clearly than just about anyone, because he was part of the Russian deep state. He knows what this is about. He talks to presidents in the morning, and by afternoon, the presidents explain to them, well, it's not exactly like I told you in the morning, because the men in dark suits have come to explain some truths to them. So this is why one shouldn't get too excited about an election period. Where we are is 30 years into an increasingly disastrous, delusional, and risky strategy. And the deep bureaucracy has not changed the strategy. And the question is whether they will before we all get blown up. And that is still to be determined.